Welcome back to our Teach Out on the future of mobility with automated vehicles. I'm here today with IWilliams, and Ian is the fellow at the Journal for Law and Mobility program at the University of Michigan. And Ian, there is a lot of exciting opportunity around this new future in mobility, a lot of enthusiasm, but there's also some hesitation, and we see that in a couple of areas. So it's no coincidence I'm talking to a lawyer. First, let's talk a little bit about privacy. These vehicles are going to be taking us to places that we maybe have never been able to get to before because of limitations in our mobility. Tell me about some of the current concerns around privacy in this space.
So I think the privacy concerns around connected and automated vehicles are really similar to the privacy concerns people already have with different internet devices, their cell phones, the social media they use. This idea that there's a lot of information being collected about you or that you're putting out into the world to use a service and you don't have control over where it's going or what it's going to be used for. So with these vehicles, think of people use their cars for such personal reasons. I mean, your car, especially once it's connected, once it's recording data, is going to know when you went to the doctor, when you went to pick up prescriptions, where your kids go to school. It's going to know facets of your life that you may not tell anyone else.
But doesn't my smartphone know that already?
It does, but your smartphone especially has a lot of controls that you can limit. You can turn off location data, you can tell apps what information you want them to share, what information you want them to keep private, you can turn off Bluetooth or GPS or anything like that. But with an automated vehicle, that might not be an option. I mean, some of the features of your cell phone, it works. My cell phone works fine despite the fact that I turn my GPS off. My cell phone works fine despite the fact that I don't, turn on Bluetooth to connect to people around me. But your car might not work in the same way. You might need to have a constant connection to GPS for it to know where it's at, or a constant signal out to the other vehicles around it so that it can navigate the environment. So suddenly we go from an environment where with your cell phone or your computer or your Facebook account, you have controls and you have toggles where you can turn it off and on.
You can't
do that with the car. Yeah, you're not going to be able to opt in or out with some of the features of the car because then the car won't work.
So that gives us an idea of privacy in terms of where we're going and our behaviors, in terms of the places we're going and the places we like to eat and all those kinds of things. But once we get inside the vehicle, things continue. The concern on privacy continues. We see this vehicle is a driverless shuttle behind us, and it represents one possible mode in the future of mobility. And it's a perfect example that vehicles of tomorrow might not necessarily look like what we're used to today. And if the vehicles are driving themselves, and you and I are relieved of the task, we may be doing other things inside the vehicle, and we might be taking advantage of large pipes of data in and out of the vehicle. So how does privacy in our mobility change when we think about the activities inside one of these vehicles?
Well, then that becomes a lot more like the privacy you already enjoy or don't enjoy with your cell phone and your computer, and that becomes much more personal choice of what am I allowing the company that's, even my cell phone company or my internet provider, what information am I allowing them, what platforms am I using. But we are seeing with some automakers, they've realized they can monetize this already, the data that's already available to them, which is what are you listening to on the radio, where are you driving if you have some sort of GPS system activated. And with even like those two data points, suddenly you have a much better tool for targeting people with commercials because they know you stopped at a donut shop and you were listening to country music, and suddenly you're going to hear a lot more donut shop commercials.
You described my life perfectly. No.
But internally, you're going to have a lot of the same choices you have in the outside world, which is when do I opt in, when do I opt out,
right?
But that's also going to have to go through who's operating the vehicle. Is this a car that you personally own and you have to buy a subscription service for, just like you do for your cell phone, to get the data in and out? Is this a car that's being run by another party and they're the ones providing you the Wi-Fi that you're using as you're traveling? Then you have to think about, well, what are they going to do with my data? You start to add extra layers of it's not just me and the service recording my data, it's now me and the person providing my transportation and my cell phone company and the platform the social media platform I'm using. You start adding more and more parties who all want a piece of your data, and you have to. Right now, some of those platforms have ability for you to opt in and out, and some of them don't.
So it sounds like when we are doing things inside the vehicle, trying to expand the more complicated but essentially similar to what we have today operation of the potential to opt in or out of services. But when it comes to actually moving ourselves, if we want to be part of this driverless revolution, the question is, what will be the form that will take? Will we all have to just opt in and say we're going to give up some of our privacy to be part of this, or will there be a voluntary opt-in option for those who want to participate, or will it be something that's regulated?
Yeah, and that's something where the law can step in some ways and say at least offer an opt-in, require opt-ins, and we're seeing certainly Europe is passing much more expansive privacy laws where there's a lot more requirements that companies offer people opt-ins and offer people ways to delete their data when they leave a service or transfer their data when they move from one account to another. And so you might have to look at that level, and you might also have to look at what can you use regulation for and what can you use just personal choice for, because certainly in the United States we have we're inclined to use less regulation and more personal choice. And how do we make sure that we are protecting people's privacy, giving them options, and not overly infringing on companies' rights for the data they might need? Because it's one thing to say let them opt in and out, but if that opt-in in or out starts to stop the car from functioning, then you're starting to have more problems. So you might have to start looking at regulations that think more carefully about not just opt in or out, but what kind of data are we collecting? How does that work in with the design of the car? And maybe through that point, you find you can make a balance point between personal privacy and the function of the vehicle through a regulatory scheme. But you want that to be informed by the people designing the cars and by the people who are using them, because you need to have that conversation between users and designers.
There needs to be that trust. A recurring theme that we've touched on here in this teach out. So maybe pivoting just slightly, I'm going to jump off the words regulation and the federal government. There's a lot of questions about these vehicles. Who will be liable if there's an accident? Should the federal government be regulating the operation of these vehicles? Will we end up with different regulations in 50 states? Can you just give us a high-level overview of where we are now in the United States in terms of regulation and the operation of these vehicles?
So right now the federal government deals with the safety end of these vehicles with NHTSA, and the states have to deal with the licensing of individual vehicles, permissions to put a car on the road day to day. And there have been a number of different laws proposed to provide like a broader federal regulation to try to prevent there being like rampant federalism of 50 states having 50 different laws. Because that's a problem. It might not be a problem now when we're just testing vehicles, but it's going to be a problem when you need that car to be able to travel across state lines, and when it starts when you talk about into the future transporting cargo across the country. I mean, there's a lot of federal regulation around the trucking industry, and if you suddenly you have a lot more complicated problem that will require more nationwide effort.
Okay, so keeping some of those elements at the federal level will be really important. But now let's fast forward to a day, maybe in the not too near or too distant future, where you and I are riding in these and sipping a coffee, and there's an accident involving one of these. We weren't driving. No one in the vehicle was driving. Who's at fault, and how are we going to determine that?
So that's one of the big questions, because right now you're at fault when you're driving a car. You had to buy the insurance, but what happens next, we don't know. So the different ideas would be, one would be that the car, that whoever's operating the car, so if it's a ride-sharing service, or if it's maybe that's owned by the automaker, maybe it's owned by a third party, however that works out, maybe they're the ones as the operators of the vehicle who have to be liable. But you could also consider maybe the automakers themselves have to be liable, because they're the ones designing, they are the driver at the end of the day. They're the ones who've designed the software and equipment that drives the car. So if there's anyone who made a choice at any level, the choice was made by the programmer long before you ever got in the car about how the car was going to behave on the road. And that becomes a question of, should they be held liable? Should liability shift from the individual drivers to the producers or operators? And that's a real question, because that could really restructure how we sell and use auto insurance. And so there's a lot of questions. There's probably some very nervous people in offices in the insurance companies trying to figure out what's the next path.
Right, so we have actuaries all across the U.S. right now looking at data for our insurance rates that's probably 5 to 10 years old. And with these emerging technologies, you see a possibility to balance the need for privacy with the need to share data with institutions we rely on to stand up this mobility infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, there's the driver behavior data already is used sometimes to reduce people's insurance rates, and this is going to give them so much more. And you might see insurance companies start to mandate you need to have driver assistance technology in your car, you need to have this and this and this, and just to before we even let you drive. And in some conversations you see, well, maybe that's the way we end up getting rid of human drivers, is you insure them out of existence, where it costs too much to ever insure a car with a human driver, and you'd rather have the car drive itself. But that, again, yeah, that's a huge privacy problem, and that's definitely where right now you would need a regulation to try to step in and say you need to let people opt in or out, because especially as we get into a world with a mixed fleet, you're going to have a lot of people driving legacy vehicles that don't have connections or automation, and are we going to just tell them, too bad, your insurance rate is now going to triple because the car next to you has either driver assistance or some sort of autonomous mode, and we know that's so much safer than a human, we're just going to price you out of even being able to drive this car, even if you can't afford a new self-driving car, or you can't afford to buy into whatever system the self-driving car is run by. Too bad, you're just not safe enough to be on the road alongside the machines. That could be a real problem, especially when you think about demographics and people in different areas of the world and areas of the country. Like, how do we allow them to be priced out of mobility?
Right, and so it sounds like there's definitely an opportunity to sacrifice maybe a small amount of privacy for the greater good, to make sure that everyone has the best possible accessibility to this technology.
Exactly.
and to mobility options in general. Well, thank you very much, Ian. And thank all of you for listening with us. And we hope to have you join us again on the forum so we can continue the dialogue around privacy and legal issues in the future of mobility.